Hello everyone and welcome to another video. In my last video we went over my game against Hikaru, and Hikaru is a big boss in the game of chess. But in this game I was up against arguably the final boss of chess, Magnus Carlsen. This game was also played in Title Tuesday, the same tournament as which I played Hikaru in, and I was playing with the black pieces. So let's have a look at what happened. Alright, so Magnus opened the game up with the move knight f3 and I played the move d5. And he played g3. So this is the start of the Reti system. So I want to go for bishop g2 and keep all of his options open as to how he wants to play in the center. Sometimes white wants to go d4, sometimes c4, sometimes d3. Again, keeping a lot of flexibility. All right, so I play g6, bishop g2, bishop g7, cancels, and I play the move e5. All right, now Magnus played the move d3. So here it turns into a bit of a reversed paired system, right? With white going knight f3, d3, bishop g2, and me having the pawns in the middle with e5 and d5. And I continue with the move knight to c6. Now, before I actually continue with the analysis, what has to be said is that before this game, I had played Magnus 3 times in Title Tuesdays. And out of those 3 games, believe it or not, I had 1 draw and 2 wins. Before this game, my score against Magnus was 2.5 to half. So let's see if in this game Magnus can settle the score a little bit. Anyway, Magnus played the move e4 to put pressure on my center, and I takes, and I traded the queens on d1. He recaptured and bishop to g4. So with this move, I'm pinning the knight on f3, and I'm setting up ideas with, let's say, knight at d4, hitting this pawn on c2. For example, in case white goes h3, this would be a big mistake, because I can take, knight d4, hit the bishop. He's going to lose this pawn, and so white will be in trouble, which is why Magnus played the move pawn to c3, stopping this knight jump. But now I develop my other knight, hitting the pawn on e4, and Magnus goes rook e1 to defend the e4 pawn. Now perhaps here I make a very first slight inaccuracy. Apparently what I should have done is play pawn to h6, with the idea that my bishop can always slide back to the e6 square and he doesn't have an annoying knight g5 jump to attack it. Anyway, in the game I play castles, and here he goes knight to a3, aiming to develop the knight to the c4 square. So like I said, if I go bishop e6 now knight g5 can always be a little bit annoying. Anyway, so I go h6, he goes knight c4, hitting the pawn, and I play rook to e8. All right, Magnus goes a4, and perhaps here I should have just stopped him from gaining more space on the queen side. Perhaps we're just copying with the move a5. Anyway, I activate my rook with rook 88. Magnus goes b4, so he's gaining more space, aiming to kick away with my knight with b5. And here, I definitely miss a bit of an opportunity. What I should have done here is go for the move rook to d3. Unfortunately, this move completely escaped my attention, but I'm hitting the pawn on c3, hitting the knight at f3, creating a bit of double attack. White can play rook e3, but there's rook d1, which is annoying. And he still has knight e1, but it all looks a little bit clumsy for white, as now he's a little bit tangled up. And apparently there's the very strong knight to d4. Wow, look at that, because after takes, the rook is under attack, and it's difficult for the rook to keep protecting the knight on e1. So yeah, this was a bit of a missed opportunity for me. Had I spotted this move, I could have gotten the advantage, but instead I played bishop to e6, hitting the knight on c4. So my idea was that in case he takes on e5, I can take, and I figured that there should be something on this diagonal, like let's say knight d7, takes, and bishop takes c3, and I figure like black should be fine somehow. Anyway, Magnus slowly but surely continues with the move bishop f1. And, you know, this is not an easy situation to be in. We are in an endgame, and I'm facing off against arguably the best endgame player of all time. Magnus, he's known to squeeze out any small advantage that he gets. So I go knight d7 to defend the pawn on e5. He goes b5, kicking my knight away. And here I should have moved my knight back to e7. This would have been a better move. I guess I can bring my knight back with, let's say, knight c8 and knight d6, but instead I go knight at b8, which is really too passive. I mean, my idea was that maybe this knight can come out here, and then the other knight here, but it's a little bit too optimistic, because it's going to be difficult to bring my knight out to the c5 square. Magnus goes bishop b3, hitting the pawn on a7, which is already a little bit awkward to defend. I play b6, and he goes a5, continuing to open up on the queen side. And here I should have set a little bit more tight with, I don't know, maybe moves like f6 to go bishop f8, reroute the bishop or maybe the knight, but instead I go f5. I wanted to create some counterplay, because after takes, maybe this diagonal can open up for my bishop, but with this move I'm only creating more weaknesses for myself. And Magnus takes and goes rook to a7, hitting the pawn on c7. He's just leaving the pawn on e4 hanging, because if I take, he just goes knight e2, and he's going to regain the pawn in the foreseeable future. All right, so I go rook c8 to defend, and he goes knight to d2, aiming to defend the pawn on e4 that way. So I want to get an f4 somehow, but for the moment this just hangs a pawn. So I play the move rook f8 to prepare this pawn push. But here he goes bishop to h3. Now my pawn is pinned, as it would hang the bishop on e6. And so I play king to f7, adding some protection to the bishop. Magnus goes rook d1, and I go f4. So he has to take, I recapture. His bishop now is a little bit trapped, but fortunately for him, he can take, and now his bishop has access to the d4 square. So still, very unpleasant endgame for me. This pawn on c7 is weak. My king on e6 can also easily get under some pressure. And again, we're up against Magnus. That only makes it tougher. So I play rook f7, defending my bishop. He goes knight f3. And here I should have just solidified my position a little bit with a move like g5. But instead I go knight c5, which really makes things very dangerous. And here, Magnus already missed a big opportunity. He could have taken on g7, give a check on d4, because after king f6, he has pawn e5 check. And if I go to f7, now my king is on the same rank as his rook, and he has knight d6 picking up a rook. Also, this is good. Yeah, here, this wins a rook, and that pretty much decides the game. So bishop takes g7 perhaps would have been an immediate knockout for him. What he did is also good. He took on c5, I recaptured, and he played pawn to b6, opening up on the queen side. And the idea is that I cannot take this pawn, as now he has checkmate in one move. So again, I'm under a lot of pressure here, but I knew, like, hey, I just have to keep fighting, because even for the best players, it's never easy to finish it off. So I play knight c6, attacking his rook over here, rook a6, good move by him, eyeing my king over here, and also my knight on c6. So I took, and here I was a little bit surprised. I thought here, rook d6 looks really good, because if I move my king back, he can maybe take here, he can take here. It really feels like everything is collapsing. But Magnus recaptured with a rook on b6 right away, and this gave me the opportunity to go rook d7. Offer the trade of rooks, at least alleviate some of the pressure and bring some of my pieces into the game as well. He played rook c1, and here again, I perhaps should have just played g5, solidifying my pawns a little bit, but instead I go rook d3, hitting his knight on f3 and the pawn on c3. And notice also that now Magnus is also getting low on time. So I feared that, things are still tough, but I felt that maybe I was going to have some chances. He goes knight h4, hitting this pawn over here, and here again, I perhaps should have pushed up the pawn, but I took on c3. But now after takes, I lose the g6 pawn, and a pawn on f4 is also terribly weak. There's no good way to defend it. I played f3, and here he played knight h4 to try to pick up the pawn on the f3 square. Perhaps even better would have been this check over here. And after king d7, he gets a very strong attack with like rook c7. The knights are jumping around. It's really tough here for black. Anyway, he played knight h4, hitting the pawn. I go king d7, getting out of the pin, and rook f8, hitting his knight on f3. But already, I'm down to my final seconds. There's the 1 second increment, but it's not easy. It's not easy when you only have 1 second increment to your clock. So you play king g2, I play king c7, hitting his rook. He goes rook to b1, I give a check. I went here to attack the knight, king here, bishop d4, and he played knight to e3, bring his knight back to the middle. So I took, and rook a8, trying to activate my rook this way, rook a3, maybe rook a2. Magnus goes rook b3 to stop me from going rook a3. And I play king d6, bringing my king up to the middle a little bit. He goes knight d2, aiming to bring his knight around to c4, giving a check, and block my only passed pawn. And I play knight d4, attacking his rook on b3. So Magnus is still in control here. He's got 2 connected passers. He also has an extra pawn. I have 1 passed pawn, but it's really difficult to set in motion. Perhaps here he should have gone rook d3 to keep my activity at bay, but he goes check, which looks very natural as it picks up a pawn. But now I give a check over here. He has to go king up, and I go rook a2. And now the things are not easy whatsoever. His knight is under attack, and if he moves the knight, he's going to hang the pawn on f2. He goes here, I take the pawn on f2, and he goes king to e5. And here, with 3 seconds on the clock, I missed a golden opportunity. What I should have done here is knight f3 check to go after the pawn on h2. It's very important, by the way, that black does not take on h2 right away, because after takes, knight f3, king f4, knight takes h2, we get into this knight endgame where both sides have a knight and a pawn. So at first glance, you might think that this is a draw, But in fact, my knight on h2 is getting trapped. He goes king g3, attacking it. Knight of 1 check and king g2. And there's simply nowhere my knight can go, as his knight on c4 is controlling these two squares. But again, knight of 3 was a big opportunity for me, because I checked the king. For example, if he goes here, now I can take the pawn. Yes, he can still try to push a little bit. He's got the more active pieces, the more advanced passed pawn, but with best play, this should just be a draw. And now it's also important that in case he does go king of 4, I can just take here with a knight. You know, I don't have to take with the rook. For example, if he goes here, I can go, let's say, like rook c2. Yes, I mean, again, white is still pushing for the win a little bit. With best play, this should be a draw. But again, it was pretty long time. Only had 3 seconds on my clock. I just made a move to make a move. But now he goes king d5. I'm down a pawn. His king is active. He's got 2 connected passers. My pass pawn is not going anywhere. So it's looking tough. I played knight of 3. Unfortunately, 1 move too late. He gave a check, king d8 and h4. And here, unfortunately, I hallucinated for a second. I thought, hey, I have rook takes c4 with the idea that if he takes f9 g5 check. But unfortunately, now his pawn is covering that square. Again, these kind of accidents can happen when you only have a few seconds on the clock. Magnus took the rook. I played here, h5, and it's clear this just lost, so I resigned. So, very tough game against Magnus. He played very, very well for the most part. At some point, I did have my chances for a draw. But overall, I do have to take my hat off as he played very well in the endgame. So right now, my score against Magnus in Title Tuesdays is still in my favor. It is 2.5 to 1.5 for me. So let's see what's going to happen in our next encounters. Anyway, I hope all of you enjoyed this video, and I look forward to seeing all of you in the next one.